Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Badruddin Muhammad,
My name is Talha Rafiq.
and welcome to episode 6 of The College Muslim. So, this is a podcast that Talha and I run to share with you all the life lessons, the experiences that we've gone through, and our coping strategies of just being Muslim in a predominantly non Muslim country throughout high school and college. And just to show everyone that you're not alone. And if you all are going through stuff like this, then y'all can relate, inshallah. So, today's topic is going to be
Hypocrisy. But we're going to break this into two different parts. So there's like hypocrisy of the belief, and then there's hypocrisy in actions. And we're going to mainly be focusing on hypocrisy of action. So belief, it can be, you kind of understand it deals with belief, and hypocrisy on
dealing with having one thing in your heart about Islam and then outwardly showing another.
So we're not going to touch that today, but instead we're going to focus on hypocrisy of action. So that in Arabic is known as nifaq fil amal. And we're going to be focusing on that, and that deals with lying, cheating, violating trust, and essentially like being two-faced.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the definition of hypocrisy we know.
Like you know how like when you say that person's like fake. Stuff like that.
Like
fake.
the person's fake. Yeah. We're going to be talking about what it means to be fake.
Yeah.
So that's our main focus today. So
I feel like it's a very prevalent topic too, because I feel like the non-Muslims, and even like when you're in high school or college, people talk about like, oh, that person's really fake, like gossipingly wise.
Yeah.
It's like it's something that's going around, and I think it's important to address it through an Islamic perspective.
Yeah, especially at a young age.
Being Muslim and how you should deal with that.
Yeah, hypocrisy is huge at a young age.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus like growing up, like I think
like when you're young, people are like like preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, like kids are very honest. I think that's what you learn. They will literally say whatever's on their mind, whatever they feel. But as you grow older, people start to learn how to hide things and how to like put on sort of a shell and then present one version of yourself to the world and another version when who you truly are, quote unquote.
And it's because they find reason to hide things.
Yeah.
So I guess we will be diving into also like what is the reasoning you're actually like committing the hypocrisy, and like what is the purpose you're doing it. Because honestly, we also want to be able to come away from this knowing ways to kind of reduce if we are committing, hypocrisy, or if we are lying, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so let's just jump into that. Let's just dive into it. So as per always, we're first gonna talk about what was the first time you kind of got exposed to hypocrisy. And this time let's talk maybe about like when we maybe have realized like, oh, we had just committed an action that might have been a little bit hypocritical. Yeah. Because I don't think there's a single individual I have met in this world who has not at least once committed an action where they were a hypocrite. And it's a very hard thing to come by, to find individuals who haven't, especially in today's society. So
I feel like today's society, we promote a sort of paradigm where everyone feels like they need to please other people. Yeah. People pleaser is like a big thing. Yeah. It's a big word that goes around. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. And I'm sure everyone has felt a time, or maybe there are people who haven't, but like for the most part, I'm sure we've all felt a time when we do something because it makes the other person like you more, or pleases the other person. So
did you do something like that? So let's go through that.
Let's go through that.
So what did you do?
That's a good segue, because I think that's the first time I've dealt with hypocrisy in general. Like outside of just like white lies or things like that, like hypocrisy. High school, I think middle school. Because middle school is when you start to sort of come with this term popular, whether someone's popular or not, whether someone's liked or not, someone's really cool or not. Sure. So with those concepts, it becomes a lot about what kind of version of yourself do you put out there. And I feel like, especially in middle school, everyone knew I was Muslim. It's kind of hard to hide your Islam with a name like Badruddin Muhammad. Yeah. So everyone knew I was Muslim, and in my heart, I of course believed in Islam and everything. But when I would project myself outside, I would bring it up as little as I could that I was Muslim, and like put that out there, because I realized, okay, so sixth grade, I would do that. I'd be like, I'm Muslim. No one cares. It's fine. But I realized that like as I was doing that, people, especially in my community, were more concerned with things that aren't Islamic. So when I was Muslim, they'd be like, oh, we can't really include him in anything because like he's Muslim, so like he's weird. So 7th grade, 8th grade, I wouldn't hide my Islam, because like it's really hard to hide your Islam. Like it's just a person who I am. Like there are certain things that I will and won't do because of Islam. But when it comes to like talking about like, oh, I'm Muslim, I can't do this or I can't do that, I just wouldn't say it out loud. And I think that's the first time I felt a little hypocritical when it comes to, in my heart, I was Muslim, but outside I would try to remind people as little as I could that I was Muslim. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. So it's hard to come up with an exact example for hypocrisy, like when it first might have been exposed to it, but I clearly remember an example of committing some kind of hypocrisy.
Gotcha.
And also it was like somewhat in an Islamic context. So back in high school, again, it was very hard for me to grasp Islam.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of trouble with religion and actually understanding it and then actually accepting it. Like for a while, it was very hard to accept it. And so I think one of the things I used to do is, again, I was in a somewhat of an Islamic community. So you would pray. And so people would ask me, like, people always ask each other, like, oh, do you have to make wudu or do you not have to make wudu, right? Yeah. And so it's one thing if you didn't make wudu and you lie saying, yeah, I made wudu. But that can be equated to simply as lying.
Yeah.
Right?
Which, I mean, lying isn't simple. Like, lying is honestly sometimes even bigger than hypocrisy.
Okay, but between hypocrisy and lying...
I just wanted to make that clear for everyone else. Yeah.
But between hypocrisy and lying, what I did in that situation is lie.
Gotcha.
But I started becoming a hypocrite in that sense too. And in a way to show like I'm a Muslim, I guess, or a better Muslim essentially, was what I would do is I would ask other people, did you make wudu? And so like I would like, if somebody were about a prayer, I'm like, oh, did you make wudu? And I knew in my heart I didn't make wudu. Like I definitely
you were like checking everyone else.
Yeah. But I would be like, oh, did you make wudu? No, okay, let's go pray. Like blah blah blah. Now that by definition is none other than hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So I was definitely being a hypocrite, and when it comes to that, and I think that's the first time that that's the reason I'm bringing that up is not because people have examples of committing a hypocritical act.
Yeah.
It might be one off, it might not be, but this was a consistent thing. This was like a thing I had to change.
Yeah.
And like this was a bad habit that had formed, and I feel like those are the most dangerous kinds of hypocritical actions too, because they happen consistently and they can compound. And compounding, any sin that compounds always ends up worse than when it began.
Yeah.
So I think that was my first time I was like a hypocrite in the sense where I actually, that's the first example I remember of, but that was high school. I'm pretty sure before that I had committed something too. I just can't think of anything off my head. But
also like hypocrisy, one way to like kind of contextualize it versus like lying is like you said, like lying is like one off. Like you'll do it once, you might say something that you did or didn't do. And obviously like lying is one of the biggest sins in Islam. So like that can be a whole other video, honestly. And I think we should honestly be doing a whole another video on lying. But hypocrisy, I feel like the way we can kind of contextualize it for this video is repeated lying that builds up into a sort of persona and it becomes part of your identity. Yeah. Like you said with wudu, like when you were talking about it, it's like it became part of your identity to like ask everyone. Yeah. Did you make wudu? And you were checking everyone else.
I didn't make wudu. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so and again, the definition of like an American sense and also in the way of like hypocrisy of actions is essentially you being two-faced in a sense where you hold a facade or you do say or do something while preaching the other side. Yeah, right. Exactly. So that is what hypocrisy is. So I guess now we can jump into like what I kind of want to tackle first is how do you actually know you're a hypocrite, or how do you know you committed a hypocritical act? Like, what is the indicators for hypocrisy? Like, well, how do you recognize that? Because I think the only way you can address problems is if you can actually recognize a problem. Yeah. So what is an indicator? And
I feel like the first sign of hypocrisy for yourself is when you don't recognize it. I feel like hypocrites, for the most part, when you're first doing something hypocritical, you're in denial about it. And I can definitely attest to that because I'm trying to think of an example, but like I know there's been times in my life where I've done a hypocritical action, and when I first did it, I was like, I'm not a hypocrite. Like I would find like various ways to just justify it to myself, and I'd be like, I'm doing this for XYZ. I'm doing this for some kind of altruistic reason, or I'm doing this for some kind of end goal. Like the ends justify the means.
There's a reason.
Yeah, I always try to like reason with myself, and I always put myself in denial, saying that I'm not a hypocrite. I'm doing this for some other reason, therefore it makes it okay, and like all kinds of weird logic.
Yeah, so like that's a big problem with hypocrisy is trying to reason and give yourself justification that it's okay to be a hypocrite. Yeah. But I mean, I actually wrote this down earlier. Yeah. And essentially, it's like you have to fear hypocrisy because once you stop fearing hypocrisy, that's when you are a hypocrite. Oh. Okay. And there's a quote by Abdullah ibn Masud, who was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah. And so at the time, he was like the greatest author of tafsir, which essentially just means he would break down the Quran, right? And he would try to understand and contextualize it for the people. Gotcha. And so he said, and this is his own quote, he said, no one feels safe from hypocrisy except for a total hypocrite. So the fact is you have to feel like before even like feeling like you need to do better or before like even like doing anything else, you have to know that you cannot delude yourself by thinking, oh, I make all these good deeds and I'm doing this for the greater good and then be a hypocrite.
I feel like hypocrisy is very highly linked with ego as well. Because I feel like you have to have such an arrogant like perception of yourself to believe that I'm so much better that I can do no wrong kind of thing. And that's what like I feel like when you talk about hypocrisy in general, to be a hypocrite, to say that like you said with the whole I'm sorry if I keep banking on your Wudu example, but it's a good example. So I feel like
no, I'm glad I can be like the perception, like the entire like point you come back to, like this is, you did this bad, bro. But yeah, use an example. It's a good example. The Wudu
so
thing.
I feel like when you're talking about the Wudu thing, it's like you're checking other people, but you consider yourself so much. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but like,
I did.
There's a shred of ego there where it felt like I'm so much better than other people that I can check other people, but I don't need to do it myself. I'm sorry.
No, that's what it was. You're spot on. You're spot on. Like legitimately, that is what it was.
From like academic standpoint of like just the way stuff is working out. But yeah.
No, you're exactly right. And I think again, like that's a great point you made. And like when I asked you, like, how do you know you're a hypocrite? Is like what you said about like first of all realizing, like
the lack of realization.
The lack of realization.
Yeah.
So if you're lacking the realization that you're a hypocrite, there's probably a really good chance you are a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really good place to put it. And so then the other flip end, because it's like a coin.
Yeah.
Like you never flip a coin. If you have flipped a coin and it lands like this, like on its side, you're super lucky. But it always picks between two sides, right? Yeah. So now let's say, okay, you realized.
And for the people that are listening, when he said it like this, he meant like on its side.
Oh yeah. So like when you flip a coin, it can land like vertically or it can land on one face.
Yeah.
If you flipped a coin and it lands vertically,
the statistical possibilities that are like infinitesimally small.
Yeah. So let's get past that. Let's get past that. Either you're on the side of, hey, I don't think I'm a hypocrite, or you say I am a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then we flip the other side. So now let's say you admitted you're a hypocrite. So, or let's say that you have some certain maybe one or two actions that can be kind of hypocritical. Mm. So what's the next step? Is identifying how to fix it? Is it like what do you think would be the next step with hypocrisy?
The next step, once you've identified that you are doing something that's
hypocritical. So let's say like for me, right?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
With the wudu thing, I realized that, hey, this is not something that I should be doing. Like I definitely have to be making wudu before I ask people if they're making wudu, and then have the proper intention of when I'm asking them, why I'm asking them. Is it because I'm trying to seem better, or is it just because?
Let's start there. Intention. I feel like first of all, identifying why am I doing this hypocritical action? Like what is the intention behind this hypocritical action? And be very thoroughly honest with yourself, because like I was saying, like sometimes I've done hypocritical actions and I'll bank it with the intention that like, oh, I'm doing this for a good intention, but like really get to the root of what is the intention of what you're doing. And there's it's not an Islamic quote, it's just a quote that Ali Abdul, another YouTuber, does. He said this, and it's completely unrelated to hypocrisy, but he was saying everything has a good reason and a real reason. So like when you're doing a hypocritical action and you like say for the wudu example again, but the wudu example, you were telling other people, oh, did you make wudu? And you were doing it, and in your heart you were thinking maybe, oh, I just want to make sure like my ummah's making wudu, and like we're all making wudu together and we're gonna go pray.
Yeah,
that would have been the good reason. But the real reason is you were just trying to get the heat off yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
obviously that might not have been the case for you, but like that's an hypothetical example.
Yeah. So it's about the intent. So it's trying to figure out what is the reason you were.
What is the real reason? Not the good reason. The real reason.
What is the real reason you were trying to be? Not trying to be, but what is the real reason you were being a hypocrite?
Yeah.
What is the real reason you were committing an action? Okay.
I feel like that goes even away from hypocrisy, just like general things too. And I've been like, my friends have called me out a lot on this too, because being pre-med, I do a lot of things that I need for my pre-med application and what people give for a checklist and kind of things. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the upperclassmen have called me out on it, where like sometimes I'll do things, whether it be like nonprofit work or like clinical experience or research or whatever, and I'll say, oh, I'm doing this for a certain altruistic reason. So take, for example, inshallah, I'm trying to work on a nonprofit to teach kids nutrition. And the good reason that I keep trying to tell myself and trying to make the intention of is I really want to help these kids. I care about obesity because I've dealt with obesity throughout my life and I want to give back. But sometimes there's always that underlying real reason, and I feel like it's shaitan creeping up on me, being like, you need this for your pre-med application, you need this for medical school application, you need to do this, like forget all the other reasons, like be pinpoint focused on like getting enough money, getting enough people, getting enough things involved. And that's always like, I feel like it's a tug of war in my head where it comes to, do I do this nonprofit? And I think another thing that I have to tell myself is they're not mutually exclusive. Like I can still do something for for a med school application because it's important for that med school application, and like inshallah that's the goal I'm trying to pursue, and it's there's nothing wrong with that goal, there's like haram with that goal, but at the same time balancing that with realizing that this nonprofit doesn't need to blow up in like a day, like it doesn't need to like get impressive growth, because that's not the reason why I'm doing this. That's not like it shouldn't be the good reason should become part of the real reason, where the good reason why I'm doing this is because I've dealt with obesity throughout my life and I want to help kids to get through it and not to end up like me. And that's kind of, that should be that I'm trying to make that part of my reason of why I do it. And still keeping in the back of my head that like I need certain checkpoints, I need to do certain things for our med school application, but that shouldn't be the sole reason.
Okay.
So intention. Really complex, really like
no. But now,
weird
okay, so
example,
we
yeah.
get okay. Now so like we're going step by step, right?
Yeah.
So we've now said that hey, I'm a hypocrite, and now we're looking into the reason of what is my what is the intention and what is the reason I was actually committing that hypocritical act.
Yeah.
Okay. So now becomes a question of
how do you get away from, how do you
how do you change in a world of like hypocrisy?
Yeah.
Especially if you're like used to something. Like when you're used to something and you try leaving it, you're addicted. Like especially when
it's an addiction, honestly. Like
yeah.
Let's come back to like doing one thing and saying the other thing. Like I said, people pleasing has become an addiction of, I would say, Gen Z. Like our generation, people pleasing has become such an addiction. And I see it in myself too. The way I talk to certain people, the way I will interact with certain people, I'll put on like not a false persona, but just a persona that makes other people more comfortable around me or like me more. And it is an addiction because we're so addicted to wanting other people to like us that we don't care. Like going back to my middle school example, like the reason why I didn't hide my Islam, but I didn't put it out in the spotlight, and I didn't want to highlight it when certain things were brought up because I wanted to please other people. And it became an addiction over time that it led into high school where like I would try to talk about my Islam as little as I could. I would try to highlight it as little as I could. So when people would ask me certain things like, oh, can you go here? Can you go there? I was like, no, I just don't want to, or I got work to do. When in reality, I didn't want to go because I was Muslim, which in my heart, I was still Muslim and I wanted, that was the reason why I wasn't doing something. But on the outside, I was trying to please other people.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the job market too. Like you were talking about pre-med, right? Like whenever we talk to interviewers, we're put on this like facade.
Yeah.
And for some people it works and some people they do well. But honestly, the people who I've seen perform the best in interviews are the ones who are just so honest and true to themselves. And it's because they will know that the work they're doing is just honest and true to themselves. And you know, whether or not that falls on Islamic lines is not the conversation. But when coming to hypocrisy on a daily basis, we are dealing with Islamic lines. Like that is the recruiter in our sense, right? Like Islam and the Quran teaching, as well as like that whole realm of things. That is our recruiter slash rules.
Honestly,
that are set.
Allah is the one we're interviewing with for Jannah. Yeah. So I feel like for me personally, just the person that I am, like being on a pre-professional track, and for a lot of for kids that are on pre-professional tracks out there, we have to adopt this mindset, and it's the only way that that most of us get through it, or at least I get through it, is I adopt this mindset where I always feel like there's someone judging me, and therefore I need to get through. So obviously there's going to be that person judging me on the med school board, right? Yeah. So I need to submit the best application I can. I need to do the best I can. I need to get all the checklists down. We should have that same zeal when it comes to putting our application for Allah.
And that's what it is, right? Yeah. Like we are going to get judged by Allah. Exactly, It's literally called Judgment Day. Yeah. And like you're going to have to go through the tests and trials and tribulations and then hopefully enter Jannah.
But I feel like that paradigm, just getting through that realization, I have to do it every day. Yeah. It's an everyday thing where I have to realize my application to Allah matters way more than my application to medical school, and I should treat it as such. And sometimes I feel like I don't treat it like that, and that's where hypocritical actions come through. Is when you realize, it's when you start putting more respect to the application you put out to other people than the application you put to Allah. Yeah. And I use the word application because that's just the way I've sort of conditioned my mind to think.
It's a good way to quantify it. Yeah. Like as because it is an application. It is. Like what is the point? We, culturally as well as like, in the modern day kind of call this us, being Muslim and in Islam as a test, right? Yeah. And that's kind of how you like quantify it. Like this is a test.
I feel like more than a test, like I think that's what you're getting at, is like, for me, what's helped me is like I've heard test all throughout my life. Like especially being desi, everyone talks about this life is a test, test that. Yeah. And I feel like more than a test, a better way to view it is it's an application. And that's kind of how Allah also wants us to. I mean, like thinking about like Yawm al-Qiyamah. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, we're not judged whether we did any bad deeds. We're judged on a scale of bad deeds versus good deeds. So we're still putting out an application. And even when you put out a med school application, there are certain things, you have failures where like you got certain bad grades, you got certain this, certain that. But what's important is that you balance that whatever bad marks that you have on your application with enough good marks that you're a good enough applicant. And that's all it is when it comes to Islam as well. Like you need to be a good enough person, not just good enough, but like a good person where your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds. And thinking about an application, I feel like is a better paradigm than thinking about it as a test. Okay.
Yeah. No, I actually really like that, because that makes it seem like less of a one-time fail kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
The one-time thing too. I feel like every time we mess up, I think we talked about this in our first podcast, in our first episode. Sometimes we mess up, a lot of the culture that sort of accumulated around Islam forces you to beat yourself up and be like, oh my God, I messed up so bad. I'm never coming back from this. it's not a test, it's an application. Well, it is a test, but like each individual thing you do in your life is a test.
Yeah.
But all those tests accumulate into an application.
Yeah.
So just because you failed one test doesn't mean that there's more tests Allah will give you to redeem yourself, to forgive. And Allah will forgive you even without putting you through another test if you ask for that forgiveness. If you ask sincerely ask for forgiveness for whatever action that you committed, for whatever failure that you did. And after you ask for that forgiveness, get on with your life, make more good deeds, fix your application. And personal example, like when I first started this semester, I had a really rough first semester, and you know about it too. Like my first semester was not good. My grades were not where I wanted them to be.
Yeah.
And if I had, and I mean, throughout over winter break, I kind of beat myself up about it. But once again, realizing that just because I got those bad grades that one semester doesn't define me. And everyone talks about how like, oh, bad grades don't define you. But understanding that bad grades don't define you is the fuel that will carry you through the rest of college. In the same way, just because you go through something really hard or you mess up, that shouldn't be the end all be all.
Yeah.
It shouldn't define who you are as a Muslim. Your deen is not defined by one or two actions. Your deen is defined by what you do on a daily basis, what you do throughout the rest of your life, how many good deeds you accumulate. And that's something that, and I say this as I'm saying this to myself as well, because it's something I have to remind myself every single day. And it's a struggle every single day to remind myself that just because I messed up once doesn't mean I'm done.
Yeah.
That was a long spiel, but that's what goes on in my head, bro.
No, that's good. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And I followed. And I think that's like a good way to transition away from this, because, you know, identifying yourself, or this is all about the self, right? So far we've just talked about like as an individual, how do you see it?
About myself.
Yeah. So how do we see it in yourself? How do you address it for yourself? And then how do you go about changing it in yourself? But there's also then but then there's also the problem of dealing with hypocrisy that exists around you, right?
Yeah.
And that's also like, that has to be addressed, because I think too often people are, it's first of all, it's right in a sense to work on yourself. If you like, say you have a sin, so say hypocrisy is a sin that you have committed or you have a habit of, the first thing you should be doing is fixing yourself.
Yeah,
that makes complete sense. Like I completely get that. But now, like moving away from that, how do you like deal with hypocrisy that exists around you? Okay, so let me clarify.
Okay,
one example that we've repeatedly talked about is like professional and jobs, etc. Okay, so we know hypocrisy exists within that. How do we go about navigating the hypocrisy that exists there, or how do we go about navigating the hypocrisy that exists around our friends, or how do we go about the hypocrisy that exists like even sometimes within family? Like how do you navigate that? Because that's really what this is about, right? Like it wasn't just like when I was in high school that my problem was just me. Okay, I was surrounded by hypocrisy, so of course I was going to pick it up.
Gotcha.
So, and no one is born a hypocrite either.
No one is born
like no one's born with it.
I feel like hypocrisy, it has more to do with the people that are around us than like an inherent
just inherently building up inside you. Like
it's not something that we're born with, like you said, but like even just think about it from like an academic. Okay, I've been taking a lot of humanities classes these last semester and this semester. So from a humanities perspective, hypocrisy comes from us wanting to put something out to other people and getting that response and stimuli from other people. So hypocrisy, like you said, it has to do with who you're surrounding yourself with. So
what? Okay, maybe this just popped in my head. This is like, maybe it's jumping forward now.
Yeah.
But like hypocrisy deals with you putting out something for other people. Okay, so that's what you said.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
So what if we start not providing that validation / pleasure to people putting out their hypocrisy towards us?
Wow.
Wild thought. But no. Say for example, like, you know, it's very hard to identify hypocrites as well. Like that's another issue with all of this is how do you navigate something that you can't even see in other people? It's, in my opinion, easier to see in yourself than see in other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but like, say like, you know, that there's some certain person that's committing certain hypocritical acts around you, by not validating their hypocritical actions, if you know they're being a hypocrite, you automatically train them not to do it.
I can give you a personal example on that, and it's one more time. It's a really niche example when it comes to pre-med. So
okay, we're back on the pre-med. Yeah,
I mean, it's the one thing I can talk about, bro.
Yeah.
So pre-med and even pre-professional tracks in general, everyone knows this. Everyone talks about it, but it creates a very toxic, competitive environment that it's just it's a really good like medium for hypocrisy to grow on, in my opinion. Because when you have such a big goal to work towards, that you start looking at everyone else as competition. And when you do that, I've met so many people who put out one face to you while doing other things. So what I mean by that is sometimes you'll ask people like, hey, I am struggling with this when it comes to pre-med stuff. I'm struggling to find clinical experience. I'm struggling to find research experience. And they'll be giving one face to people when they're talking to other pre-meds, but then they'll be doing other things by themselves that they don't want to share. And I feel like obviously like everyone's entitled to whether sharing what they do in their lives or not. But at the same time, it's like when every single person does that, it starts to form a culture where every single person feels as though they can't talk about their accomplishments, their activities or things, whatever they're doing in their life, because they feel if they talk about it, that someone else is going to like compete with them or take over or something like that. And it's created a culture, as we said. And a lot of, I'm sure every pre-med, pre-law, pre-professional student that I'm talking to that's listening to this understands that this toxic culture comes from a lot of hypocrisy, where it comes down to people saying one thing but doing another. And it's something that I've dealt with because.
So how do you navigate that? Like, what do you do?
How do I navigate that? I try to fight back against it, and even fighting back against it, it comes with a lot of backlash. So I will, when people ask me for help or things like that, I'll give to them straight. I'll be like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I think you can do, and here's how I can help you out. But when I do that, people see that as a sign of arrogance too. And there's a lot of backlash that comes with that. And I think that's also a result of the hypocrisy of the culture that's formed around pre-med, pre-professional tracks, is whenever people do try to help, people see it as if there's some kind of ulterior motive and it's not altruistic and that they're trying to sabotage your plans. And it's just a lot of paranoia.
Okay.
But yeah.
So away from like the professional emphasis, okay, from an Islamic perspective, how do we navigate it when it exists within our communities? And this is
like friends,
masjid, your friend's parents,
masjid, hot take,
your friend's desi parents.
Oh,
so hot takes. But like one of the things that I will tell my friends who are Muslim is if I recognize like they lied or they did something, like one of the first things I ask them is like, first of all, like, did you question like why you did it in the first place? And if they have an answer and they have a reason they're like working on it, all right, good, then I'm not going to press you. Like I do this for myself too. Like if I have a reason, like if I know that like my reasoning, whatever reason I came up for myself is focused on growing and moving out of it, then I'm not gonna like bank on them. Like that's a good thing.
Yeah,
right?
That's definitely a good thing.
So, but what if like the reason is like, had to, or like they were gonna make fun of me if they didn't, et cetera, et cetera. Like what if like by not being a hypocrite, you're lowering your value, right? So if you told the honest 100% truth, let's say for example the wudu thing that I had, by not making that same way, I would have not been as pious looking as I might have been, right? So that's why people are hypocrites as well sometimes. It's because it lurks in the benefit, right?
Definitely, yeah.
It's not always to hide. So like, I mean, for me, like the one example I always give everyone is on the Day of Judgment, basically when we're presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every single part of our body will attest to what they commit, the sins they committed, what they were used for. Yeah. Like if you use your right hand to slap your spouse, like your right hand is gonna talk against you, and it's gonna put you in a bad spot. And the exact same way, your tongue will talk, and your tongue will explain everything that it did that was good and that was bad. Yeah. And so a lot of people, if you're a hypocrite, if you have been a hypocrite, when I tell my friends who are Muslim, I'm saying your tongue's gonna talk against you, and you really want that saying against you on the Day of Judgment, that you told other people to do one thing and that you were doing another thing behind that back, like. That is one that's a huge, and like that kind of, if you believe in Islam, if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, then that is something that people will be receptive of if they truly do believe in Islam. So how do we go about, just apart from that example, that's one of my methods that I kind of share.
Gotcha.
What is like some other methods / ways that we can kind of express and kind of like open people's eyes to like, hey, hypocrisy exists, try to address it? Because again, the issue always comes back down to the fact that we're not addressing it in the first place.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to, I mean, one thing I want to focus on is you talked about community, like your Islamic community, and sometimes you're hypocritical to seem more pious to other people. And I think that's something that we need to talk about when it comes to the kind of communities that we're creating around Islam. And I feel like especially in communities that are more established and more traditional and like very...
It's Islam versus culture.
Exactly.
It's always Islam versus culture.
Always Islam versus culture.
Like in Islam, if you were to live in if the community was to follow Islamic guidelines, there shouldn't be a problem.
It shouldn't,
right? But it's the culture not only that exists from a back in the old town in Pakistan kind of culture, but it's more like the culture that they develop within communities. Like that culture can become hypocritical, and it can house jealousy, and it can house all these things. And
I think it comes down to when people are working on Islam, we label them as not Muslim sometimes. And this is like this. I'm just gonna say this is a call to like all the Desi communities, all the Muslim communities out there.
Yeah.
But we need to start embracing more people who are working on their Islam.
Yeah.
And I feel like especially a lot of kids. I've a ton of parents talk in my community about, oh, my kid's doing this, my kid's doing that. He's going away from Islam. He's like very mad about like Islamic things. But I feel like when it comes down to it, when a kid tells you that, hey, I don't get this, or I don't understand this, or this seems like really weird or whatever, like we need to embrace the fact that like they are at least they came to you, at least they're questioning it.
Yeah.
And we should be more receptive and compassionate when it comes to people who are working on their Islam. I've had tons of, so in my community, I mean, obviously, like people in my community know that like I work on my Islam. I have a big passion for Islamic education. So I've had a ton of kids when I'm talking to them as like what's up, bro? Like we're just talking, and they're like, oh, yeah, I don't really believe in that, or like that seems really weird, or like yeah, that's all like random stuff. Like when people say that, I see this in my community, and I see how much that they feel like they can't go to anyone else, and they feel as though like they can't tell anyone this, because if they do, then they're gonna be labeled as, oh, you're one of the bad kids. Like how many times in your community have you seen like, oh, there's a good kids and the bad kids?
A lot. No, legit. When you said the exact line, a lot of times, oh my God, how am I blanking out? Because literally I was about to start crying. I'm not kidding. I was like, there's something that wrong.
That when people are working on their Islam, they're labeled as non-Muslim.
Yeah. Like, yeah, no, dude, I'm not kidding. Like, that's how I felt.
When kids are working on their Islam, they're labeled as non-Muslim.
Yeah, and I'm not kidding. The reason I like felt like really emotionally, like something like hurt, because like genuinely that's something like I faced.
Yeah.
And that's something that's the whole reason of why I had trouble with Islam. I looked at all these Muslims and all these like people in the mosque and masjid, and I was like, it deep in my heart. First of all, like I recognized like they put on this idea of perfection, and in my head is like, how do I be perfect? Like, how would I even do that? Like, what is the point of putting that on if you aren't perfect? And yeah, no, in general, like genuinely that's a big like, wow, I have no words. I have no words. I mean, if you listen to the podcast, you didn't see that, but this man just gave me a hug. But I
honestly, like coming back to that, I had the opposite reaction to that. The whole stigma of, like I said, like when someone's working on their Islam, there's labeled as non-Muslim. Even when I had like doubts in my iman and my faith, I did the exact opposite of what you did. So like it's like, as far as I know from your story, when you felt as though people would be like, if you're working on your Islam, that you're labeled as non-Muslim, you turned away, or you were like,
more than anything, it's because I saw hypocrites.
Yeah,
like that's why I'm bringing this up in the first place, is because I saw so many hypocrites when it comes to like them preaching this perfect Islam, they do this, do that, blah blah. And then they were doing one thing behind their back. And I think when I recognized that hypocrisy existed, I was like, what kind of Muslim would I be if I entered myself into this world?
Yeah.
Right.
And for me, it was the opposite, because my parents always instilled in me this idea of reputation and your community, and Izzat is what it's called in like Urdu Hindi.
Yeah, so like Izzat, thing, yeah.
Reputation. So for me, because I knew, like even from a young age, like even as little as like elementary school, I knew that if anyone ever saw any weakness in my iman, or if anyone ever saw me questioning something, they labeled it as non-Muslim. I dove right into like being as Muslim as I possibly could be. And that even includes things that are not even within the scope of Islam, like, oh, like being really, really quiet, being really reserved, being introverted. Even though like I'm, like, you know me, I'm definitely like, when it comes to Islam and when it comes to Islamic education, I'm someone who is all out there.
Yeah.
When it comes to like questioning things, talking about things, working through hadith, and I feel like questioning is something that we, especially in like our cultural Desi communities, we stigmatize it.
Well, it's because, no, I'm not kidding. Like literally the direct reason for questioning being seen as like a bad thing or seen as like not open is because hypocrisy exists. Because the issue is when someone questions something, you then have to open yourself up. So like if these kids are questioning, hey, is this happening? I mean, one way of approaching it is just to give them like the sermon of like, this is the perfect way to go about it. But the way we should be approaching it, and the way we should be going about it is, hey, I made this mistake too, right? And within maybe internal family that works, but we need to do that on a community basis. It's showing as a community it's okay to mess up. The issue is that hypocrisy exists where it's like, once you get past it, like once you get past all these troubles and trials, and then you have your kids, etc., and you're in a community, like people don't want to show that they had this like these same exact troubles.
People want this idea of perfection for the community, and internally like, oh, we can have struggles, but on the outside, everyone needs to see us as like, we are the perfect Muslims. We can do no wrong.
Yeah.
And like, alhamdulillah, what I'm seeing is like, especially with the more like younger shuyukh, younger scholars, they're more willing to sort of share their trials and tribulations in order not to expose their sins. And they're very good about that. What I've noticed is that like, they do really well when it comes to sharing the trials and tribulations without sharing the sin part of it.
Yeah.
And they do it in a way that you can relate to it and you can understand that I'm not alone. Like what we're trying to do with this podcast, alhamdulillah, I've seen a lot more younger shuyukh doing it, but I feel like there's many communities, especially like my own community, where we don't have a lot of like younger scholars. So we're still stuck in this whole mindset of we need to be perfect. And that whole perfection mindset is what led me in my younger days to just do everything as right as I could, and even do whatever. Once again, I was being a hypocrite when it comes to pleasing my Muslim community. I wanted to please my Muslim community regardless of whatever I felt in my heart. I would show that that's not what I feel. I completely 100% agree with anything anyone says.
In
I'll do
Muslim
whatever
community.
you want. Yeah. In the Muslim community.
In the Muslim community. Yeah. Okay. So how did you go about like, do you address that in your community? Like I know, like you just said, these kids come to you.
Yeah.
And let's say like a lot of the people maybe listen to this podcast now might switch over and try to be a good role model. Yeah. Right. But how do we go to the people who are in charge and kind of expose them to the idea of like it's a big task. Yeah. I haven't done it. Like, but I've now tried
on like very, very small instances. Like especially when it comes to like, well, one thing I've always tried to do is when it comes to the parents, like, especially like if some, like no one like I'm not the spokesperson for my community or anything, but like, but like sometimes like kids will come to me with like advice or things or like things they're working through. And I'll try to also tell the parents this, and then I've always like faced this like paradigm where the parents want to kind of live in their own bubble, but they want their children to be exposed to Islam. Yeah. And they want to keep like living whatever life they've been living. And it's gonna be a really hot take. And I hope people in my community who listen to this don't come after me. Yeah. Okay. One thing that I try to sort of instill is the fact that like parents can't want to live one set of values and principles and have their children live by another set of values and principles. Yeah. You need to embody the values and principles you want your child exactly to conform to. Mm-hmm. So if you want your child to be super religious, pray 5 times a day, read Quran, become a hafiz, understand Islam, like even the academic perspectives of it, you yourself need to encourage that. And even if you yourself don't like become a hafiz or something, read Quran with your kids.
Not even encourage that, but like, sorry, I had to interrupt, but like,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, because I think the connection is like, you can't be a hypocrite on that either. So like you have to lead by example. Yes. So again, praying 5 times a day, you have to be the one to get up and pray 5 times a day.
Especially with parents who are very, very busy with their work lives and their jobs and things like that, which is totally fine. It's not, there's nothing wrong with having a very like time intensive job. But at the same time, you need to also like, obviously I'm saying this as a 18-year-old kid. So I feel very.
No, but you're not wrong, because I've talked to my parents about this too.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wish like they did is be more actionable in front of my eyes. And if they had done that, it might have instilled things at a younger age for me, whereas I wouldn't have to discover so much of it on my own. And they did their best they could. And I agree, like the job thing is a big factor. Like my dad was never in the house because he was always working, right? So I never got to see whether he was praying at work or etc. But like one of the goals I have is like literally if I have kids, to be a role model, like in their eyes. Absolutely. I don't want to say, hey, let's get up and play dhuhr. I want to be getting up and praying, and then they just run and like they join in, right? Exactly. So that's the point. So like, it starts on a familial level.
Let me also say this: like I've also lived like a very privileged life when it comes to my mom. My mom didn't work, and she was very into Islamic education as well. So that's kind of where I got my passion from. So I always had my mom to like default to see her get up really early in the morning and pray tahajjud, to see her always reading Quran, and I've been, alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for that. But not a lot of kids have that, and I feel like for one thing, obviously I'm 18 years old, so I can't really tell people how to parent yet, but or maybe I'll never tell someone how to parent, but like I can give like when I am a parent, maybe I can give advice.
Look, I think here's the thing. What I'm saying is like, for all the people also listening to this, as a kid, you're gonna give pretty good advice on how to parent, and the reason is because
you haven't gone through it.
You haven't gone through it, but the bigger thing is because you're on the receiving end of parenting. Yeah. So whatever advice you have would make your life better in your opinion, and therefore, in my opinion, it's valid.
Also, there's another reason why I hate giving parenting advice at this young of an age, or not even to parents, but just like to other kids, or just like having takes on parenting, is because
it's hypocritical.
It's hypocritical. And also like sometimes I'll see like on Instagram, like people will be like, oh, like when I'm a kid, I'm gonna give my kid a phone when they're like in 4th, 3rd grade, and I'm gonna let them do whatever they want. And I feel like that's also I'm always scared of going to that extreme where I'm like I'm just like a really like titled and spoiled kid. I'm just like be like, oh, I want everything in the world and I want no restrictions and no responsibility, which is not what I want. But when it comes to Islam, I think the one thing that I want to focus on when it comes to community is we need to start leading by example more. We need to show kids that because it's like Islamic guidelines are there. There's no fronting on that. Like Islamic guidelines are there. But at the same time, like we need to also embody those Islamic guidelines if we want the next generation to follow them. We can't always be imposing, hey, you need to pray 5 times, you need to fast, you need to read Quran, you need to do all this, and then we're not doing it.
Isn't that a great example of how to not become a hypocrite either?
Absolutely.
Lead by example.
Lead by example.
So lead by example, and automatically you will stop becoming a hypocrite, because if you do it, you don't have to lie about it anymore, or you don't have to push it or encourage it. It's like the whole wudu example I said earlier in the podcast was, I used to not make wudu, but to ask others if they made wudu. But look, lead by example. Make your wudu first. Let people make wudu, and then you can check.
When it comes to leading by example, lead first and then preach. Or honestly, even preaching should be like very like when you're first leading by example, preaching should not be on your mind at all.
Yeah,
you should just be doing what you need to do, and if other people see it, they see it. Even when other people don't see it, I feel like that's the first time when you can start leading by example is when you do the things you do in front of people, even when people aren't looking. And that's what taqwa is understand that like even when other people aren't looking, Allah's looking. So if we start leading by not only by example when our kids are looking, but even when our kids aren't looking, I think that's a great gateway to get out of the hypocritical mindset that we've sort of built.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point.
We dropped a lot of hot takes there.
No, this video has a lot of hot takes.
Yeah. Please come at us in the comments. No,
I mean, I think it's more reasonable. Like, hypocrisy in this sense is very taboo. And like, in any Muslim community, like the only times I hear hypocrisy in a Muslim community is one, if I directly ask my parents about it.
Yeah.
Or let's just talk about straight up community.
Wait, one thing I want to talk about is you said hypocrisy is so taboo in our community.
Yeah.
And I think that's also another thing I want to address.
It's only brought up when sheikhs bring it, by the way. So and they bring up in their sermons, but other than that, they don't address it. But continue.
No, but I want to come back to what you said about there's two types of hypocrisy. There's hypocrisy of the deen and there's hypocrisy of amal, of actions.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have put such a big power on the word hypocrisy when what we actually mean is hypocrisy is not being a munafiq. A munafiq, especially in like the Quran during Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, a hypocrite was someone who said, "Hey, I am Muslim. I'm with you all. I support you all." And in their heart, they never believed in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That is what a munafiq is. That's not what hypocrisy is. I feel like, and this just comes once again from bad translation of the Quran or bad translation of Arabic words and Islamic words. Is that, and we were talking to one of our scholars in our community the other day, and that's what he was trying to tell me, and it's really eye opening for me. Is that like doing hypocritical things is a sign of being a munafiq, but it doesn't make you a munafiq. And I feel like if our community just understood that, hypocrisy when it comes to like lying or hypocrisy when it comes to doing certain actions, this doesn't mean that in your heart you don't believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah.
And if they understood that, then they'd be more open to talking about it.
It could be a sign of it, but that doesn't give you any right to judge someone as a hypocrite of deen.
Yeah.
A hypocrite of action does not make you a hypocrite of deen. It could be a sign of it, but that's for Allah to judge.
Yeah.
That's not for people to be like, hey, you do one thing and you say another, or you do this, or like the wudu example, like you ask everyone who to make wudu, but you're not making wudu. That doesn't mean that you don't believe that Allah is the one person you should worship, or the one being you should worship.
Yeah.
That all that means that it could be a sign of it, but that's not for you to judge. And I think that's a great gateway for, if our community understands that, if our communities out there understand that, I think that would be a great way for us to start talking more about hypocrisy of actions.
Yeah. And make it less taboo within the community as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
I feel like that's why we don't talk about hypocrisy of actions, is because the word hypocrisy has been so intertwined with munafiq and nafiq of deen. And well, I mean, that's not what it is.
That's one direct reason. But also I think on the other end, it's whenever we talk about hypocrisy, what it does lead to is saying that you aren't who you're. So when it comes to hypocrisy of actions, it's the internal face and the external face, right? But when you have to address it, then you have to admit that the internal face is the truth. And a lot of people do hypocrisy in the first place because they don't want that internal thing to be shown, right? And so talking about it in a community, then you have to like basically show that this is something that human beings, you're all exposed to.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I feel like a lot of people, sheikhs, parents, et cetera, they don't want to admit that they had troubles and problems. away from the fact that you shouldn't be sharing your sins. Like it goes down to the deepest points of like literally saying that, oh, it's not something I used to deal with. Like it's not something I went through. There's a lot of topics, some we'll address later, hopefully on this podcast, that are going to deal with things that people don't typically talk about.
Yeah.
Right. And so even hypocrisy is one of those things. This is one of the more hot take things is like no one addresses it on a large scale because other than preaching the perfection of how to not be a hypocrite, no one wants to admit that they were a hypocrite.
No, yeah. I think like being a hypocrite, like hypocritical actions, we don't share them. And like this, like you said, it goes away from just sharing your sins. Obviously, like you shouldn't be sharing your sins, but I think it's okay. You
shouldn't be sharing your skins. Sorry, skins. You shouldn't be sharing your sins with the intention of just sharing, with the intention of just trying to set a precedent. But it's okay to say that sins existed in your past and you grew from it.
Exactly.
It's a growth thing that has to be important.
I feel like especially parents, community leaders, the traditional ones, the older ones, they're very scared of showing any sort of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And vulnerability, I honestly, this is gonna be another hot take, but I think 99% of teenage angst and teenage when it comes to like aggression towards Islam from teenagers comes from this sort of perfection that the elders have built around themselves, where it comes to, well, not just perfection, but they just cut out a whole part of their lives. Like this is the life I want to share. And like a lot of older people like to like bank on Gen Z for like sharing a highlight reel of their life on Instagram. Yeah. But I feel like they've also done that, just not online. They've done it with like verbal stories and stuff that's passed down. I feel like Instagram existed in their day too. Yeah. But it just existed.
And you also admitted, like not admitted, but you said that a lot of like younger community leaders and sheikhs are like taking the opposite. And like the sheikh we talked to, but like we knows and sheikhs we talk to, a lot of them do express like, hey, I used to mess up. Yeah. And they don't tell me exactly how they messed up.
They never tell you what they messed up in, but they'll tell you like the category of life. Yeah. Or like they'll be like, oh, in high school I messed up, or in college I messed up, or this is what I did, or this is like what the area of what I did, but they never tell you like, oh, this is exactly what I did. This is my sins.
And they make it very clear as to what solutions work for what type of problem. So then you can start employing that. But it's that generalization of just saying, hey, don't be a hypocrite, that never works. Yeah. So
a lot of hot takes.
I think we should wrap it up because that's almost about 45 minutes.
All right, sounds good.
So we're about to wrap it up. But I just want to conclude also like on the general gist of hypocrisy of actions. It's not easy to walk away from the stuff. Like if we're hypocritical in some senses, preaching one thing and doing another thing and you're doing your back.
It's something you've built into your, it's like a building that you've built into your identity.
Yeah. If it's like, and honestly,
it's hard to tear it down.
You can admit it. It can be an addiction. Yeah. If it's something that I don't expect to change in a day and
you're not going to break that building down with a wrecking ball. It's going to be brick by brick.
Brick by brick. You got to take it one piece at a time. And honestly, it's something I worked on. It's something you probably worked on. It's something I am actively working on. Same. Right? So you're not going to be completely alone. You're not alone in that. Yeah. And anyone who's listening to this should understand that it is, what's the point of
it's a progressive thing.
Yeah. The end what's between the start and the end wouldn't be called a journey unless you were actually about to like go through a lot of trials and tribulations, right? So it's a journey. So don't be too hard on yourself. It's just being consistently reminding yourself to do it over and over again, and something that both of us do as well.
Inshallah.
Yeah. So on that end, we will conclude.
Jazakallah khair for listening. Appreciate you all.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.